talk about love, the grammar of the heart, recording love in the fragmented age. How's
Yes,
that, Mr. Mick?
this is how we got it wrong and how to rebuild. So, this is welcome to another episode. We're here to discuss something that affects every single person listening: love, relationships, and why we seem more confused about them than ever before. We live in an era obsessed with love, yet we've never been less certain of what it means.
Truly, truly empowering topic. So, let me start with the big question, Mr. Mick. What happened to love? Why are we confused today?
That's exactly the right place to start, and it gets to the heart of what I call the great confusion. Look, we live in this bizarre paradox. Sex is everywhere, and everywhere you look, but genuine intimacy is rare. Commitment has become completely optional, but loneliness is epidemic. We have more relationship choices than any generation in human history, yet marriage rates have plummeted and birth rates have collapsed across the Western world. This isn't random chaos, it's a direct result of a cultural revolution that promised liberation but delivered fragmentation. What we've lost isn't just tradition for tradition's sake. We've lost the story that made love make sense. Here's a fundamental shift: love used to be a covenant. Today, it's just a vibe. The Judeo Christian tradition once provided this incredibly robust framework for understanding love. Think about the early church fathers. Augustine and Aquinas defined love as caritas, this stable, self giving posture of the will toward the good of the other. In his Confessions, Augustine describes love as a divine gift rooted in God's eternal nature, where human love mirrors divine self donation. Aquinas, in his Theologica, refined this further, arguing that love is an act of the will, not merely an emotion, ordered toward the ultimate good of the beloved, even at personal cost. This was love as sacrifice, endurance, and purpose. But the foundations were laid even earlier. John Chrysostom, the golden tongued preacher of Constantinople, declared in his homily on Ephesians, nothing is more precious than to be loved by one's wife and to love her in return. When husband and wife are united in marriage, they no longer seem like something earthly, but rather like the image of God Himself. This vision saw human love as theomorphic, bearing the very form of divine love. Clement of Alexandria wrote in his Stramata, the man who marries for the sake of begetting children must practice self control so that it is not desire he feels for his wife, whom he ought to love, and so that he may beget children with a chaste and controlled will. Here we see love elevated above mere passion, anchored in purpose and sanctified intention. The Jewish tradition provided equally profound insights. Rabbi Akiva taught that beloved is man, for he was created in the image of God, but it was by a special love that it was made known to him that he was created in the image of God. This principle undergirded the Jewish understanding of love as reflecting divine nature itself. But then modernity completely reshaped this vision. The Romantic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries elevated passion over duty, recasting love as an intense individualistic experience. Philosophers like Rousseau emphasized the primacy of personal desire, arguing that authentic self expression trumped societal or moral constraints. Kant, in his moral rigor, inadvertently contributed to this shift when he wrote in Metaphysics of Morals, sexual love makes of the loved person an object of appetite. While Kant intended this as a warning, the modern mind seized upon this transactional view of relationships. By the 20th century, this merged with the rise of radical individualism, where the self became the ultimate arbiter of meaning. Love was no longer about the other, it was became about my feelings, my fulfillment, my self-actualization. Psychologist Eric Fromm captured this shift perfectly in The Art of Loving. Modern man's happiness consists in the thrill of looking at the shop windows and in buying all that he can afford to buy, either for cash or on installments. Love itself became a commodity to be consumed. The sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s accelerated this shift dramatically. Feminist thinkers like Simone de Beauvoir argued in The Second Sex that sexual freedom was essential to dismantling patriarchal structures. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman, she wrote, advocating for complete autonomy over one's body and relationships. This decoupling of sex from love and commitment promised empowerment, but fractured the deeper grammar of human connection. And we can see the fallout. Jean Twenge's recent book, Generations, documents this extensively. Gen Z women raised in the wake of these cultural shifts report unprecedented rates of depression that are 34% higher than millennials of the same age, anxiety rates 40% higher, and loneliness rates 25% higher. The promise of liberation has left an entire generation adrift, desperately seeking meaning in a culture that prioritizes fleeting experiences over lasting bonds. You can even track this in pop culture. The 1950s and 60s songs often romanticize love as an overwhelming emotion, setting the stage for its modern redefinition. Elvis Presley's Can't Help Falling in Love captures the romantic ideal perfectly, love as an irresistible force, not a choice. By the 1970s, songs like The Carpenters' We've Only Just Begun still nodded to traditional commitment, but framed it through a lens of personal fulfillment, hinting at the cultural pivot towards self centered love. In conclusion, love was fundamentally redefined as self expression rather than self donation, and we broke the grammar of our hearts, losing the Judeo Christian anchor that once gave love its moral and spiritual weight.
Mr. Meg, that's a fascinating historical overview, but let me push back a bit on one key point. Many people today would say, look, sex is just a physical act. As long as it's consensual between adults, what's the big deal? Why can't we separate physical intimacy from all these heavy emotional or spiritual baggage? Is it sex really more than just physical? Why did not be decoupling of love and sex fails so specific spectuality?
Well, this is exactly where modern culture gets it catastrophically wrong, and the consequences are devastating. We treat sex like a sexual activity. Dating apps, social media influencers, even public school curricula promote this idea that as long as it's consensual, anything goes. This view completely dismisses the psychological and spiritual dimensions of sex, reducing what should be a profound human experience to a mere transaction. The Judeo Christian tradition, however, sees sex as fundamentally sacred, a physical and spiritual union that's inseparable from love and commitment. Genesis 2:24 speaks of one flesh, describing a bond that transcends the purely physical to create what they call covenantal unity. Tertullian, the fiery African theologian, wrote beautifully to his wife. How beautiful then the marriage of two Christians, two who are one in hope, one in desire, one in the way of life they follow, one in the religion they practice. Nothing divides them, either in flesh or in spirit. This wasn't prudish repression, it was a profound recognition of sex's significance. John Chrysostom elaborated in his homily on Matthew. The Savior came not simply to put an end to our former troubles, but to lead us into a better life. For just as one who destroys a tottering house does not merely throw it down, but prepares to build a better one, so Christ did not come just to dissolve our nature corrupted by sin, but to raise us to a greater dignity. Sexual union within marriage was seen as participating in this divine restoration. The Jewish wisdom tradition offers similar insights. The Talmud teaches, were it not for the evil inclination, no man would build a house, take a wife, or beget children. This paradoxical teaching suggests that sexual desire, when properly channeled within marriage, becomes a creative force for building civilization itself. Early Christian thinkers like Tertullian emphasized chastity not as repression, but as a way to honor the body's divine purpose. In his On the Veiling of Virgins, Tertullian declared, "You are God's temple from the moment you receive the Holy Spirit." This perspective held that sex, when divorced from love, distorts both the act and the person engaging in it. And here's the remarkable thing: the psychological evidence completely supports this ancient wisdom. A 2021 meta analysis in Archives of Sexual Behavior found that women engaging in casual sex report significantly higher rates of regret, 65% versus only 20% in committed relationships, along with 30% increased anxiety and 25% more depressive symptoms compared to those in committed relationships. This holds even after controlling for religiosity or social conservatism. Men aren't immune either. A 2019 study in the Journal of Sex Research found that men in hookup culture report lower emotional satisfaction and higher rates of relational dissatisfaction. Modern psychology confirms what the ancients knew. Psychologist Helen Fisher's neuroimaging studies reveal that casual sex activates dopamine pathways associated with addiction, while committed sexual relationships activate oxytocin and vasopressin systems linked to bonding and attachment. As Fisher notes in Anatomy of Love, casual sex can hijack the brain's natural bonding system, creating chemical confusion that undermines our ability to form lasting attachments. The rise of pornography has further eroded the connection between sex and love. Peggy Orenstein's research in Boys and Sex reveals that for many adolescent boys, pornography is their primary sex education, shaping expectations of domination, emotional detachment, and female submission. This creates a devastating feedback loop where real intimacy is replaced by performative sexuality. You can trace this cultural shift in popular music too. Songs from this era often separated sexual desire from commitment. The Rolling Stones' I Can't Get No Satisfaction epitomizes sexual frustration divorced from love. By the 1970s, Rod Stewart's Tonight's the Night celebrates casual encounters, while Donna Summer's Love to Love You Baby reduces intimacy to pure physical sensation. These songs normalize the decoupling of sex from love that defines modern hookup culture. All terrific music, but the trend is telling. In conclusion, the decoupling of sex from love hasn't liberated anyone. It's created a generation struggling with chemical confusion, emotional instability, and the inability to form lasting bonds.
Okay, Mr. Mick, but even if I accept that sex is better within committed relationships, here's what I'm hearing from a lot of people, especially young folks. They are terrified of commitment itself. They want to keep their option open, avoid settling, and focus on personal growth and career advancement. What is commitment, and why do we fear it so much in our culture?
This gets to the absolute heart of our relational crises. Commitment today is viewed with deep suspicion. We're taught constantly to keep our options open, to avoid settling, to prioritize personal growth above all else. But here's the fundamental misunderstanding: commitment isn't the enemy of growth, it's the essential condition for it. In the Judeo Christian tradition, commitment is the very essence of covenantal love. The Bible presents marriage as a divine institution, reflecting God's faithful love for his people, as described in Ephesians 5:25 to 32. John Chrysostom preached powerfully in his homilies on Ephesians. When husband and wife are united in marriage, they present an image not of earthly things, but of God himself. The Jewish concept of Brit or covenant emphasizes a bonding promise that fosters trust and mutual responsibility. Early Christian thinkers like Clement of Alexandria saw commitment as the path to sanctification. In his Pedagogicus, he wrote, "Marriage in itself merits esteem and the highest approval, for the Lord wished men to be fruitful and multiply." He did not say this concerning a multiplication of vices, but the production of men over whom he wanted to reign. Marriage was understood as cooperating with divine creativity. Jerome, despite his preference for celibacy, acknowledged marriage's dignity in his letter to Eustochium. I praise wedlock, I praise marriage, but it is because they give me virgins. I gather the rose from the thorn, the gold from the earth, the pearl from the shell. Even while advocating celibacy, Jerome recognized marriage as a sacred context for human flourishing. The Jewish tradition provides profound insight into nature. Maimonides wrote in his Guide for the Perplexed, "The love of man for woman and of woman for man When it is strong, is described by our sages as strong as death. When we find such a love in a person, it fills the greater part of his thought and is always present in his mind. This isn't describing obsession, but rather the natural result of covenantal commitment. Philosophically, commitment represents this beautiful paradox of freedom. Soren Kierkegaard captured this perfectly in Works of Love. Love is not a feeling, it is an act of the will. To love truly is to bind oneself freely, choosing the good of the other over personal convenience. This echoes Aristotle's concept of eudaimonia in Nicomachean Ethics, where true happiness arises from living virtuously within a committed community, not from chasing fleeting pleasures. The psychological research on this is overwhelming. Commitment activates parts of the brain associated with meaning, stability, and long term planning. A 2018 study in Personality and Social Psychology Review found that people in committed relationships experience 15% higher life satisfaction, 20% better emotional regulation, and 25% higher long term happiness than those in casual or serial relationships. Psychologist Robert Sternberg's triangular theory of love identifies commitment as one of love's three essential components, alongside intimacy and passion, noting that commitment is what separates romantic love from infatuation. The fear of commitment stems from our culture's obsession with autonomy and choice. Psychologist Barry Schwartz argues in The Paradox of Choice that excessive choice leads to anxiety and indecision as people fear missing out on better options. This mindset traps relationships in the novelty phase, constantly chasing dopamine hits rather than building genuine intimacy. You can see this fear reflected in popular culture. Pop songs often reflect this commitment phobia. The Beatles' Run for Your Life chillingly warns against infidelity, revealing a possessive view of love that avoids true commitment. By contrast, the Supremes' You Can't Hurry Love acknowledges the need for patience and love, but its focus on waiting for the right feeling still sidesteps the deliberate choice of commitment. In the 1980s, Tina Turner's What's Love Got to Do with It cynically dismisses love as a second-hand emotion, prioritizing independence over relational bonds. These songs mirror society's growing reluctance to embrace the vulnerability that commitment requires. In conclusion, the flight from commitment is a flight from love's most essential nature. Commitment isn't stagnation, it's the structure within which love deepens and matures.
But Mr. Mick, but was what I'm wondering about the bigger picture. If a commitment and marriage are so beneficial, why did marriage become optional in the first place? Historically, was not marriage just assumed to be what adults did? What did we lose when we lost that assumption?
This is such a crucial shift to understand because it reveals how dramatically we restructured the entire life course. Historically, marriage was a cornerstone, a foundation for adulthood, not a reward for achieving it. In the Judeo Christian tradition, marriage was a sacred institution ordained by God to foster love, procreation, and societal stability, as outlined in Genesis 2:18 through 24. The rabbinic teachings in the Talmud emphasize any man who has no wife lives without joy, without blessing, and without goodness. Marriage was seen as essential for human completion. Christian theologians developed this understanding further. John Chrysostom called marriage a school of virtue where spouses learn selflessness. In his On Virginity, he wrote, "Marriage is a remedy. It serves to keep us from the unbridled lust that would otherwise lead us to adultery." But this wasn't merely negative, it was about channeling natural desires towards sanctification. Augustine provided what became the classic formulation in On the Good of Marriage. These are all the good things of marriage: offspring, fidelity, and the sacramental bond. These three goods, tria bona, of marriage created a framework that endured for centuries: children, faithfulness, and permanence. The Jewish philosopher Immanuel Levinas offered a modern articulation of this ancient wisdom in Totality and Infinity. Love is not a possibility. It is not due to our initiative. It's without reason. It invades and wounds us, and nevertheless, the I survives in it. Marriage provides the context where this wounding love can become healing. Philosophically, marriage represents a social contract with transcendent significance. John Locke argued in two treatises of government that marriage stabilizes society by creating families as its foundational units. This view held for centuries, but the modern world has completely reversed it. Marriage is now what sociologists call a capstone, delayed until careers, finances, and identities are fully optimized. It's become a luxury good, accessible primarily to the economically elite. The statistical evidence is staggering. Economist Lyman Stone's research for the Institute for Family Studies shows that marriage rates have collapsed not because of the cultural irrelevance, but because social structures no longer support it. In 1960, 72% of US adults were married. By 2020, this fell to just 50%. This delayed marriage has cascading effects: dramatically lower fertility, 1.6 children per woman in 2020 versus 3.6 in 1960. Weaker family stability, with 40% of children now born to unmarried parents, and what researchers term stunted male development, where men marrying later show measurably lower emotional maturity, according to a 2017 study in developmental psychology. The psychological insight here is crucial. Marriage provides a unique context for psychological growth that no other relationship structure can replicate. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, suggests that stable partnerships foster secure attachment, reducing anxiety and promoting resilience. A 2020 study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that married individuals report 20% lower levels of stress and 50% higher life satisfaction than their unmarried peers, even controlling for income and education. Eric Erickson identified intimacy versus isolation as a crucial developmental stage, noting that the avoidance of such experiences because of a fear of ego loss may lead to a deep sense of isolation and consequent self absorption. Losing marriage as a cultural assumption has left many people completely adrift, disconnected, and confused about the purpose of relationships. Sociologist Robert Bellah warned in Habits of the Heart that American individualism was systemically undermining the communities of memory that give life meaning. Marriage was the most fundamental of these communities. You can trace this shift in popular culture too. Pop songs once celebrated marriage, but later questioned its necessity. The Everly Brothers' Love Hurts portrays love as painful yet enduring, hinted at the challenges of commitment. By the 1970s, ABBA's Knowing Me, Knowing You mourned the breakdown of marriage, reflecting growing cultural acceptance of divorce. In the 1980s, Billy Joel's Uptown Girl highlighted class barriers to marriage, framing it as an elite institution. These songs chart the shift from viewing marriage as essential to viewing it as an optional, mirroring societal trends. In conclusion, we didn't free people from marriage. We systemically removed the most stable source of meaning, community, and psychological growth from their lives, leaving a void that fleeting relationships simply cannot fill.
All right, Mr. Mick, but let me play devil's advocate here because I think this is important. Critics of traditional marriage would argue that these arrangements were often oppressive, especially to women, and that they enforced rigid gender roles that limited human potential. Are traditional marriage better? What does the actual evidence say when we control for all these factors?
This is honestly the best kept secret in modern society. Traditional marriages, defined by shared faith, commitment to mutual service, and transcendent purpose, outperform virtually every other relational model by massive margins. But we need to be clear here. I'm not talking about patriarchal obsession or rigid gender hierarchies. I'm talking about tradition rightly understood, where both spouses are bound to mutual responsibilities and service to each other's flourishing. The Judeo Christian tradition views marriage as a divine covenant, not a power structure. Malachi 2:14 calls marriage a covenant before God, binding spouses to mutual fidelity and purpose. Augustine argued in On the Good of Marriage that marriage unites man and woman in a sacred bond that reflects God's love, fostering virtues like patience and forgiveness. This perspective contrasts sharply with modern views of marriage as a contract dissolvable at will. Ignatius of Antioch wrote in his letter to Polycarp, "It is proper for men and women who marry to be united with the bishop's approval, so that their marriage may be according to God and not according to lust." This wasn't ecclesiastical control, but recognition that marriage needs community support and transcendent purpose to thrive. The Jewish tradition emphasizes marriage's sacred nature. The Talmud teaches when husband and wife are worthy, the divine presence rests between them. When they are not worthy, fire consumes them. Marriage was understood as either profoundly elevating or potentially destructive, depending on the couple's spiritual commitment. The empirical evidence is overwhelming. A 2022 Journal of Marriage and Family study found that religiously committed couples report 85% satisfaction rates versus 65% for non religious couples, with divorce rates of 15% versus 40% for the general population, and significantly stronger co parenting bonds with 30% higher trust levels. Most surprisingly, couples who marry young within a faith context fare better than those who delay marriage without a shared view, according to a 2019 family relations study. This completely challenges the dominant narrative that delaying marriage leads to better outcomes. Philosophically, traditional marriage aligns with what Plato called the good life in the Republic, where virtue is cultivated through stable, committed relationships. Critics argue that traditional marriage is inherently oppressive, especially to women, but this conflates tradition with patriarchy. Tradition, rightly understood, binds both spouses to mutual responsibilities and service. Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas argues in Totality and Infinity that ethical relationships require prioritizing the other's good. This is exactly what traditional marriage, properly understood, cultivates. The psychological insight here is fascinating. Traditional marriages foster what psychologist Eric Erikson called generativity, the fundamental human desire to contribute to future generations. A 2021 Journal of Positive Psychology study found that couples in faith based marriages report 20% higher levels of purpose and 25% higher community involvement, significantly enhancing psychological well being. Research by psychologist Scott Stanley shows that couples with dedication, commitment, intrinsic motivation to maintain the relationship rather than constraint commitment, external pressures keeping them together, report dramatically higher satisfaction and stability. It's worth noting that biblical marriage calls husbands to love their wives as Christ loved the church, meaning completely sacrificial, self giving love. When both spouses embrace their roles as servants of each other's good, rather than pursuing individual fulfillment at the other's expense, the result is mutual flourishing that modern relationships can rarely achieve. You can even track the cultural shift in popular music. Pop songs from the era often idealized marriage, but later questioned its value. The Shirelles' Will You Love Me Tomorrow grapples with the fear of abandonment, seeking assurance of genuine commitment. By the 1970s, Paul Simon's 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover casually lists ways to end relationship reflect marriage's declining cultural sanctity. In the 1980s, the Police's Every Breath You Take blurs love with obsession in highlighting increasingly distorted views of commitment. These songs trace the erosion of marriage's cultural significance. In conclusion, marriage isn't just a private contract between two individuals, it's a public covenant that provides structure, accountability, and generativity across generations, consistently outperforming modern alternatives when properly understood and practiced.
But, Mr. Mick, here's what supporters of a sexual revolution and modern relationship culture would argue. Look, we freed people from oppressive constraints and outdated traditions. We give them a real choice, authentic autonomy, and the ability to define relationship on their terms. What does the sexual revolution fundamentally get wrong about freedom?
This cuts to the philosophical heart of everything we've been discussing. At the core of the sexual revolution was this vision of freedom as simply the absence of constraint, freedom from traditional morality, from religious authority, from social expectations. But this is a shallow, ultimately adolescent conception of freedom. True freedom isn't freedom from obligation and commitment, it's freedom for love, purpose, and transcendent meaning. The Judeo Christian tradition teaches that genuine freedom is found in submission to God's will and alignment with the moral order. John 8:36 states, "If the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed," suggesting that true liberation comes from aligning with divine purpose rather than rejecting all constraints. Augustine captured this paradox perfectly in his Confessions. "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." Freedom without proper moral ordering doesn't lead to fulfillment, it leads to chaos and restlessness. Christian philosopher Joseph Piper argued brilliantly in Leisure, the Basis of Culture, that freedom without love becomes aimless consumption. The essence of sloth is that man does not, in the last resort, give the consent of his will to his own existence. When all boundaries are removed, nothing, not sex, not love, not even the self, retains any ultimate meaning or significance. Thomas Aquinas provided the crucial theological foundation in Summa Theologica. Free will is the cause of its own movement because by his free will, man moves himself to act. But it does not of necessity belong to liberty that what is free should be the first cause of itself. True freedom operates within the order of being, not in rebellion against it. Philosophically, this aligns perfectly with Immanuel Kant's concept of autonomy in Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, where true freedom involves acting according to rational moral laws, not simply following unchecked desires. The sexual revolution's systemic rejection of such moral laws has led to what can only be described as a relational desert, record breaking loneliness, with 50% of US adults reporting chronic loneliness, according to a 2023 Gallup polling, dramatically fewer stable marriages, and increasingly fragile, ephemeral relationships. The psychological research completely supports this critique. The pursuit of unconstrained freedom undermines psychological health and well being. Self determination theory, developed by psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, emphasizes that humans need autonomy, competence, and relatedness for psychological flourishing. The sexual revolution's obsessive focus on autonomy alone completely neglects relatedness, leading to epidemic isolation. A 2020 American Psychological Association study found that prioritizing personal freedom over relational commitment increases anxiety by 30% and depression by 25%. Psychologist Roy Baumeister's groundbreaking research on willpower reveals that self control functions like a muscle that strengthens with use. In Willpower, he writes, people with better self control are happier than those without it. They're happier in the long run, partly because they're better at avoiding problems and conflicts. The sexual revolution's systemic rejection of sexual self control has created far more psychological and relational problems than it solved. You can trace this false understanding of freedom in popular culture. Pop songs often celebrated this shallow liberation. The Monkees' I'm a Believer equates love with instant emotional conviction, completely ignoring the discipline and commitment that real love requires. By the 1970s, Fleetwood Mac's Go Your Own Way explicitly embraced breakup as liberation, prioritizing individual independence over the difficult work of reconciliation. In the 1980s, Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun championed purely hedonistic freedom, completely sidelining love's deeper demands and responsibilities. These songs fueled the cultural myth that authentic freedom means escaping all obligation and commitment. In conclusion, we must completely reject the false freedom of endless options and embrace the true freedom of chosen commitments rooted in love's divine purpose and moral significance.
So, Mr. Mike, so given everything we've discussed, the cultural breakdown, the psychological evidence, the philosophical arguments, here's the ultimate question that I think our listeners are wondering about. Can we go back? What would a genuinely restored vision of love and relationships look like in practice?
This is the hopeful part of our conversation, and it's crucial to understand. This isn't about nostalgia or going backward to some idealized past. This is about recovering and applying timeless wisdom that we foolishly discarded in pursuit of false promises. The Judeo Christian tradition offers a complete blueprint for restoration. Proverbs 3 through 4 provides the foundation. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. This calls for a fundamental return to covenantal love, where sex, love, and marriage are properly intertwined rather than fragmented. John Chrysostom provides an incredibly practical vision in his homilies on Ephesians. The love of husband and wife is the force that welds society together. Men will take up arms and even sacrifice their lives for the sake of this love. Marriage wasn't conceived as personal fulfillment alone, but as the essential foundation of social stability and civilizational continuity. Augustine offered profound hope for renewal in the city of God. Peace between man and man is well ordered, concord. Domestic peace is the well ordered concord between those of the family who rule and those who obey. When we restore proper relationships within families, we create the foundation for ordered, peaceful communities. Philosophically, Hannah Arendt's concept of natality in the human condition emphasizes the uniquely human capacity to begin anew through meaningful action. Rebuilding a healthy love culture is exactly such an act, requiring genuine courage to reject harmful cultural norms and embrace what works. A truly restored relationship culture would teach several fundamental principles. First, that sex belongs within the context of committed love, not casual lust or recreational pleasure. Second, that love means consistently willing the good of the other person, not chasing fluctuating feelings or emotional highs. Third, that commitment represents a path to growth and maturity, not a prison or limitation. Fourth, that marriage is fundamentally a covenant with transcendent significance, not merely convenience or contract. This restoration requires several practical commitments. We must raise children with these values from an early age, actively resisting algorithms and media that systemically monetize desire and undermine commitment. We need to build communities where both families and single people can thrive in meaningful connection rather than isolated individualism. We must create social structures that support rather than undermine stable relationships. This aligns perfectly with social capital theory, which demonstrates the crucial link between strong community ties and mental health, as Robert Putnam argues in Bowling Alone. Modern psychology strongly supports this restoration project. Psychologist Martin Seligman's extensive research on human flourishing identifies strong, committed relationships as the primary predictor of life satisfaction and meaning. In Flourish, he observes very little that is positive is solitary. When was the last time you laughed uproariously all by yourself? Human flourishing is fundamentally relational, requiring the kind of deep, stable connections that traditional marriage fosters. Even popular culture occasionally hints at this restoration. Some songs point towards authentic love rather than its counterfeits. The Beatles' All You Need Is Love, while oversimplified, points to love's absolute centrality in human experience. Simon and Garfunkel's Bridge Over Troubled Water evokes genuinely sacrificial love, echoing the concept of caritas. Even in the 1980s, Journey's Faithfully celebrates commitment and fidelity amidst temptation, offering a countercultural affirmation of dedication. These songs suggest that elements of true love persist in our collective consciousness, waiting to be fully reclaimed and celebrated. The beautiful reality is that this wisdom works. When people embrace covenantal love, committed marriage, and proper sexual ethics, they consistently report higher satisfaction, deeper meaning, stronger communities, and greater psychological flourishing. The question isn't whether this restoration is possible. The question is whether we dare to choose what's true over what's temporarily convenient. In conclusion, rebuilding a healthy love culture means deliberately choosing what's true over what's easy, guided by timeless wisdom, philosophical clarity, and overwhelming empirical evidence.
Mr. Mick, so as we wrap up this conversation, what's your final message to our listeners about love, marriage, and relationships?
Here's what I want every single person listening to understand. We've fundamentally misunderstood love because we've completely unmoored it from its rightful home, marriage, commitment, and shared life, properly rooted in Judeo Christian wisdom, philosophical clarity, and psychological truth. Tertullian wrote these beautiful words in To His Wife. How beautiful, then, the marriage of two Christians, two who are one in hope, one in desire, one in the way of the life they follow, one in the religion they practice. This beauty isn't mere nostalgia or romantic idealization, it's profound wisdom, the recognition that love requires structure, purpose, and transcendent meaning to truly flourish and endure. Marriage is quite literally the most powerful social technology ever created by human civilization. It forms men and women into mature adults, provides the optimal context for raising children, and creates a lasting legacy across generations. It reminds us that love is fundamentally not about what you feel in any given moment, it's about what you deliberately choose to build over time. The early Christian martyr, Polycarp, facing execution at age 86, declared with absolute conviction, 86 years I have served Christ, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me? This same unwavering fidelity, choosing love despite cost, difficulty, or changing circumstances, must characterize our approach to relationships and commitment. Love isn't dead or obsolete. It's simply waiting for us to remember what it is: a covenant between persons, a deliberate choice of the will, and a calling that has the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire civilizations. The question facing our generation isn't whether we can afford to restore this vision of love, marriage, and commitment. The question is whether we can afford not to. The evidence is overwhelming, the wisdom is available, and the need has never been greater. All that remains is the choice. These are powerful words to end on. We did an incredibly deep dive into love, marriage, and what it truly means to build relationships that last. For our listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. Are you seeing the effects of what we've discussed in your relationships or community? What resonates most with you from this exploration of traditional wisdom versus modern approaches? In conclusion, we'll be back soon with another episode diving deep into the ideas that shape our culture and our lives. And until then, keep building something that lasts.
Definitely very well said, Mr. Mick. Something that will last. In a world of increasingly defined by digital isolation, ideological divides, and fleeting connections, this profound exploration invites us to reclaim the language of love. Mr. Mick, would you like to plug in something?
And appreciate the opportunity. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, create a valued book in 90 days at G. Mick, the Doctor of Digital Smith, PhD, on LinkedIn. Also, listen to the Doctor of Digital podcast, available on YouTube and all your audio sources. Also, pick up a couple volumes on Amazon. That is Burning America and also On Track Ian Hunter.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Make the Doctor Digital. And please do listen to our baby podcast, Mental Health 101, because mental health is created for empowering our mental health awareness. So, Mr. Mick, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Until next time, Deus Volt.
More to come, people. See you soon.